Safety District. Other members on this commission, on my far left, Cindy Lamb from the City Council, Roy Christensen, also from the City Council, fellow County Commissioners Todd Wilchin and Bill Avery, and Larry and Gaylord Barrett on the far end representing the City Council. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from our previous meeting. They were emailed to you. There is the Open Meetings Act posted at the rear of the hearing room. Thank you for that reminder.
I move approval of the minutes.
Second.
Comments or corrections? If not, please call the roll. Janelle?
Short?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Baird?
Yes.
Baird?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Wilkin?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. Item 2, Statement of Financial Activity. Liz?
Good morning. Liz Thannell from the County Budget and Fiscal Office. You have the Statement of Financial Activity in front of you as of May 31st, 2016. We're near the end of the fiscal year, which ends June 30. So you have for total receipts $3,333,819, which is 7% over the budget of $3.117 million. Disbursements, your commissions are at $60,763. Operating costs are only at $26,289 right now. I am expecting an invoice on the 25% of Roger Feigard's salary per the interlocal for his time, and that will be coming this month in June. So that figure will jump up to more like $75,000 for the year. Construction project costs are at $999,000 for the year. So your total disbursements are $1,086,379,000, but I think they'll be more like $1.3 million by the end of June. Your ending cash balance as of May 31st was $1,009,361. Your investment balance was $15,332,129, leaving you with a total fund balance of $16,341,490. And below the report, the bottom section shows where the investments lie. There's about half of them in money market and half in CDs, roughly.
Questions for Liz? Todd?
Liz, can you go back to the under disbursements, the construction project costs? There's the $7 million that's been undispersed. Can you what are those?
On the next page that Roger will be reporting to you later, the second column over shows you where those projects are budgeted, the various dollar amounts that are budgeted. The biggest amount is the South Beltway. There's $4 million budgeted there, and there have been no expenses yet. Roger, for every year that we've not started the project, there's been a chunk of that project added to it, to the budget each year. So,
I'll cover those expenditures, Todd, in the budget update sheet.
Other questions? Not. Is there a motion to approve the Statement of Financial Activity?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Christensen?
Yes.
Gaylord Baird?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Wilkin?
Yes.
Short?
Yes. Okay. It's a perfect segue into the current budget status.
Okay, good morning, Roger Feigard. Current budget status, you also have in your packet the one-pager that shows previous budget, the budget, expenditures thus far. In a nutshell, Liz touched on that a little bit. We haven't billed yet for my time. I have those invoices now, and those will be going through. So my expectation is there'll be about $15,000 or $20,000 left in the operating budget at the end of the month. And as Liz was saying, Todd, on those disbursements, if you look at the middle column that's at the very top, it says through 5/31/2016. That's the column showing what we have spent. Shows we've spent just under $1 million for capital projects this year. The two single biggest items are $572,000 for the 33rd and BNSF crossing. That's the Pell study that we'll be hearing more about. And $329,000 to Hickman for the continuation of the quiet zone. So that's where the majority of the CIP money has been spent. My estimate would be that we clearly won't spend more than about $1.5 million by the end of the month total of the $8 million budget. So that $6.5 million that's unspent then is cash that will just continue on over into to be rebudgeted for next year and is available for cash flow and upcoming projects at that point. That's really all I had on the current budget, unless there's any questions.
Okay. Why don't we move into project updates and
Okay.
provide a little bit more information budgetary-wise on those projects?
Okay. Just some general overview. This community has a significant number of activities and needs going on, particularly with BNSF. The Airport Authority has a project going on. City has a project going on in Yankee Hill. The county has issues with crossings, and clearly the RTSD is working on quiet zones, and we're working on 33rd. So I had sent letters several months ago trying to continue to engage the railroad and figure out where these activities are. The Airport Authority has tried to act on their own behalf, contacting the railroad, and I've just reinforced and followed up with that. The same as working with the county engineer. We had a listing of county crossings with proposed work that we wanted, that needed to be done and needed to be addressed across the county. I met with one of the assistant directors of public projects, Lynn Leapfried, here in Lincoln on 31 May. She's housed out of Minneapolis and is not the regular assistant director in this area. And then I met again very briefly with the director of public projects and the two assistant directors in Savannah on June 8th. I guess I would call it some not necessarily very good news from the standpoint of the railroad as we think about projects and working ahead. The BNSF Railroad is in process of reorganizing their territories to resplit or redivide the United States from 3 divisions to 2. And what I'm being told is they are seriously looking at the reduction of 2,000 non-union FTEs in their current organization over the upcoming year. To me, that means a couple things. One, their capital improvement dollars are going down. They're spreading the work from three managers in 3 areas to 2 managers and 2 areas. And it just means that our interaction, our challenges with continuing to meet with them and work on projects will continue to be significant. I don't bring that up as a way of an excuse for them, but simply that's where their business is at this point in time, and it's going to take diligence on our end to engage them and try to move forward some of these projects. And I have some ideas and thoughts as we go through some of these other projects here, and we'll ask for your concurrence in some activities of myself and other engineering staff this summer. So as I said, they've gone through that reorganization. The county crossings, again, I've gone over that letter and the request of a number of those locations. And I've asked again for them to set up a meeting with the roadmaster so we can go out and look at those crossings and try to assist the county engineer in some repairs. Maybe some good news. As we have gone through and studied and been talking about the possible grade separation project at 33rd, 35th, and Adams, it has been brought to our attention through public process that there are no current pedestrian facilities or sidewalks there at 33rd Street and at 35th and Adams. I have a verbal concurrence from the railroad that later this fall they will, as they're doing repair in the area, lay in additional crossing panels to the side that would allow sidewalks. And if that does occur, and I will push them to do that, if that occurs, then I would come back to the board and ask for some miscellaneous construction money and try to figure out how to connect those sidewalks up to those panels. So while we're waiting for a project to move forward, we would at least have some better pedestrian facilities at those two grade crossings. So I was encouraged about that. And we ought to be able to do that. So that's kind of an update of where we are, kind of current projects and activities that aren't otherwise on the agenda for more specific discussion.
Any questions on any of those three items? We will move on then to committee updates.
The National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, along with the AASHTO meeting, was in Savannah, Georgia, a week and a half ago. I went down on a Tuesday and came back on Friday. I think it was less humid and less hot in Savannah than it was here last week. Kind of a great old town. We were pretty busy from 10 in the morning till 6 or 7 each night working on, and I'm part of the Chapter 8, which is the Highway Rail Grade Crossing Committee. We spent an awful lot of our time discussing, or arguing if you wish, where an emergency notification sign ought to be placed at or near an at-grade crossing, such that if somebody was disabled, caught, stuck, immobilized on a crossing, where is the appropriate location for a sign that they can emergency call to the railroad operations to make sure that trains are stopped, and that potential that somebody might not get hit. Should it be 90 degrees to the highway? Should it be parallel to the highway? Nothing like a group of railroaders and DOT folks arguing. We did not come to a conclusion yet, and I'm sure we'll work on that next winter as well. The new manual continues to be 2 or 3 years out, and there are some interim guidelines for reflectivity. There's some interim guidelines on flashing yellow lights, and those are things that we can continue to try to use not only for the RTSD and grade crossings, but within our traffic operations sections as well, both for the City of Lincoln and the County Engineer's Office. So that's kind of where we are in the committees. I do continue to appreciate the support to go to that meeting. I did get to spend a little time with the railroad down there. I find that typically they use those meetings to try to talk about projects and get some things done at that point. So that's all I have on committees. Any questions?
Very quiet group this morning, no questions. All right, we will move on to the Southwest Lincoln Quiet Zone.
Okay. Justin Peterson from Olson Associates is here in case you have any questions. I know we may have a longer meeting at the end, and I'll try to be very brief, but in your packet you had a drawing of the Southwest Lincoln Quiet Zone, and attached to that you also had a scope of work and a potential So, this map, and for people watching, this is Highway 77 going north up through the west side of our community and up across Hobson Yard, connects to I-80. This is BNSF's Hobson Yard. This is Rosa Parks Way that comes from downtown out to 77. The red line and the blue line is what we quite often call and speak of. We call that the Amtrak line. It's actually the Hastings line. It's a BNSF track that Amtrak and other trains run down through what we call the South Salt Creek neighborhood past Yankee Hill Brick, and then on out and head towards Hastings. The board had commissioned a study for a quiet zone at crossings of F Street, a trail crossing on the levee, A Street. Let's see, that would be Folsom, West South Street, West Van Doren, Coddington, and Calvert Streets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 crossings. And as we went through the public meetings, we heard some folks say, well, gosh, you know, we really need to do this. There's a lot of neighbors out there, but if you start looking at that picture, you start wondering if there isn't perhaps another idea that might serve the community better than just a quiet zone. If there's tracks that go through the yard and come back out and connect out here southwest of Lincoln, what if we found a way that trains didn't have to come down through the South Salt Creek neighborhood? What if we could reroute them through Hobson Yard around here, and instead of doing a quiet zone, we'd do a no train zone? We were talking about spending anywhere from $3 to $7 million for potential quiet zones to protect those crossings in that area. You still have the trains, you still have the pedestrians, you still have the conflicts, you still have the backups, and occasionally you still have the horns. So I asked Olson's, I visited with several of you a little bit, I listened to others in the community and said maybe we ought to stop where we currently are on the quiet zone study and investigate this other option as possible, a viable alternative to a quiet zone. And I had nods. I'm sure some of our folks in the neighborhood don't want to wait, and yet the potential of eliminating trains versus having them and having the quiet zone, I think, is very attractive and something that I would strongly encourage and recommend. So, in your packet, you've got the drawing, you've got a scope. It's not a formal contract yet, all the language is not there, but a scope of service to study that alternative. And we have talked to the railroad. We believe it is physically possible to build another track through Hobson Yard. It may involve bridges, it may involve impacts to a Highway 77 viaduct, but we believe it's physically possible, and the railroad is at least willing to consider that alternative. The contract that's in your packet has a fee of $65,700 to do that study. We still have about $20,000 left in the current Southwest Lincoln Quiet Zone. We would let that set and rest. In the proposed budget that you've not yet seen, I have increased or show an item, and I'll hand out a proposed budget sheet in a minute because there were 3 minor revisions in the budget sheet for moving ahead. I have shown $100,000 in next year's budget for that Southwest Lincoln Quiet Zone to study that option. What I would be requesting of you today, and I don't want to short circuit any discussion, and if there's folks from the public that want to weigh in on that, we certainly should let them do that. What I would be asking you to do is your motion is to kind of suspend the current work and not spend any more work on the quiet zone, enter into this contract for $65,700 contingent on you approving a budget that has a total of $100,000 for next year in there to cover the 20 left over contingency and the 65.7. So I would tell you, I want to be very forthcoming, a project to build a new track through Hobson Yard isn't a $3 to $5 to $7 million project. Mm-mm. It is probably a $20 to $25 million project. What I would tell you though is a quiet zone is 100% funded by the RTSD. A track abandonment, relocation opens itself for all kinds of other funding partners. The Nebraska Department of Roads in their high hazard elimination, their relocation funds, train mile tax could come in and help pay for that. There are also grants that I think that would be available that would that could be applied for in a situation like this with a significant safety improvement. And the railroad itself, while their economy is not very good right now, talking about the elimination of 8 at-grade crossings, of which 5 of those, as a minimum, are pretty busy arterial streets. Their improvement in safety is greatly enhanced. There's also a place down closer to downtown where that track comes across and crosses the track that comes out of Hobson Yard and goes down 3rd Street. And that switch in there is called a diamond. Diamonds are notorious for heavy maintenance, having operational problems. I think there are reasons that the railroad would be supportive of trying to eliminate and getting rid of those. So I don't want anybody to think that this is a trade one project cost-wise for the other, but I think the potential for significant improvement is great if we look at that alternative. So,
Couple questions before we go to public comment. Bill?
You seem to be hinting that the railroad would be supportive of this proposal, but you have not had any discussions with them? No preliminary?
I have had verbal discussions with them. They are completely open to analyzing that. Our consultant had a preliminary meeting with a local engineer here. We haven't gone farther than that. I think they are cautious because I think they're going to come back and say, you know, maybe you need to build us a new bridge over Salt Creek, or you've got to modify the viaduct out there for Highway 77. So they're probably more conservative than I am. I have a tendency to be more optimistic and say, let's go for this. This is a great opportunity to do this. But yes, they are open. And I guess in this study, and the scope that you've got has a schedule in there, but that schedule is about a month to 6 or 8 weeks out of date now over when I received it. We would, my guess, my hope would be that by the December meeting, we would shoot for that, no later than March. We'd be able to come back and report to the board the feasibility and some preliminary costs, and that in approving, if you chose to approve this contract, part of that would be working diligently on my part to try to develop an MOU with the railroad on a cost share and their participation that we would bring back to the board in December or March at the time we start looking at draft budgets for the upcoming year. So at this point, it's an idea. I think it's a good idea. We would be, if it looks like it could become a reality, then we'd be in a position to start talking about schedule and funding at probably no later than March of 17.
Cindy?
Yeah, do you have an idea, just a rough estimate of what the RTSD's portion of that 20 to 25 million would be?
No.
Do you have a hopeful, optimistic figure?
I've tried to go into all of our projects, Cindy, saying in a situation like that the RTSD would fund 50%. I think when you bring 50% to a federal match or cost share match with others, and we would bring those after we have proven there's a feasible project and you actually have plans and you're ready to move ahead. And then if the board is in a position to approve some budgets, you're in a good shape, I think, for negotiating those kind of cost shares.
Todd?
I don't represent southwest part of the county, so I'm not familiar with this area. What is the impact going to be on the future development of residential housing if you relocate the line? I mean, is this an existing spur, or is that?
Well, let me go back through. We've talked about probably would need to run an additional track through Hobson Yard, but this existing track
That's
exists.
existing. Okay.
And this would remain, the blue at the bottom would remain as a spur track to backfeed into the Yankee Hill brick business at that location.
So the impact, well, so first, there would be a new line through Hobson Yard, but then there would be increased traffic on the existing line connecting the Hobson Yard down to the southwest?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And so
Is there gonna-
Actually, fewer arterial crossings on that line than there is the other, but you're right, there would be an increased number of trains crossing West Van Doren out here and West A Street. They are further out from the current more urbanized area, but that is an impact to take into account.
And so-
And-
go ahead.
I was gonna say that, that's something that, I mean, as you look forward into the development of residential housing, I would probably assume that that would have an impact on that expansion as well.
I can speak to that just a little bit because we've had a lot of discussion at the City Council with the West A Neighborhood Association and developers who are working to bring in more housing units on West A and Southwest 30th, which would be east, I think, of this line if it
That's
were to be
correct.
relocated. One of the issues for residents in this area as they develop it is that train traffic makes the morning commute really difficult. So there are many, many residents of the existing developments in that area that are held up as they try to come into town in the morning. Moving it would alleviate that problem for those people east of the line. So it buys you some time to improve infrastructure and roadways and other routes into town, and really take some pressure off of those neighborhoods. So I can safely assume that the West A Neighborhood Association would be very favorable to this kind of a development for their area of town.
And I think that's a perfect opportunity because we do have a member of the neighborhood association here and invite you to come forward at this time and share any comments you might have.
I need to look, certainly we would follow public process. We wouldn't be going back out and studying another option without including the public and everybody, so.
Well, first of all, I'm Sean Robinson. I'm just a citizen at large. I live over by Lee's Chicken. I had a chance to visit with some of you during your open house held at Roper Elementary earlier this year. Thank you for the opportunity to do so. I do not fundamentally disagree with the alternative build-a-track idea that we have. I have concerns that eventually our community is going to grow to the point where that line is going to be impacted through noise in the neighborhood again at some point in the future. And it also maybe has cost implications that we want to consider carefully. It sounds like it could be significantly more money on our part, although the idea of a 50% in really would encourage other stakeholders to say, well, you've got some skin in the game here. We want to partner with you. But my main message and the reason that I came is some of you encouraged me and my neighbors to come to the meeting and show support for the quiet zone or an alternative. So thank you for giving me your time this morning. And happy solstice.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Dave.
Roy?
So, Roger, what I'm hearing here is an initial higher cost for this alternate project, but in the long run, lower cost, because if we do come to the point where we need to create a quiet zone out of Hobson Yard down to the southwest, there are fewer crossings that we'd have to deal with.
That is correct, and you wouldn't have the ongoing maintenance and safety issues with those 8 crossings that are there today. They would just be gone. The other thing, in working with county engineer and city engineer's office, any road projects in the future, when we are crossing those arterial streets, we would try to build them in such a way that a quiet zone could be incorporated in the future without coming back and retrofitting. So trying to make sure if it's a paved roadway, it's got medians and it's offset, so gates and lights, if it meets the criteria, can be put in at that time and not after the thought.
Now, I know we're putting you on the spot here, but you mentioned a date when, we could possibly see progress on this alternate. And so can you give us a quick rundown of ideas of when things could start happening and when it would be finished?
Can I ask Justin to come up, and I'll put him on the spot with me? So Justin, come up. While he's coming up to just talk about the engineering, clearly, if we study this option and we come up with budget impacts, you don't just throw a project like this into a 12-year CIP without some impact to others. And clearly, those would be part of the discussion. What's our cash flow going to be? What's the schedule on that? If we move ahead, we are committed to a South Beltway, at least within the CIP. And currently, we're moving towards supporting the 33rd, 35th, and Adams project with its cash flow. So those would be projects that we'd have to take into account as we'll lay that, all of that in, and that would have to, I think, be part of the public discussion and board discussion, certainly December, March, and then in June next year.
Wow, that's a interesting question. I'll echo what Roger said, though. Again, I'm Justin Peterson, project manager for the Southwest Quiet Zone design team here. Like Roger said, we're going to do all we can to hit the December meeting with the results of this feasibility study that we would take on. As far as you kind of looking into the future and just saying when everything's going to be done, that's really tough to do until we do have those in-depth conversations with the railroad and NDOR if it impacts, their bridge on 77. There's just some things detail-wise we'd have to get worked through on that. The design itself is not, a long-term, drawn-out design process. We can get through that pretty quick. It's when we can fit it in Roger's budget and move things forward that way. So,
Roy?
Okay, one other kind of follow-up here, because if we were to say, yes, we're going to do this alternate thing, and after the study's done, and we're all happy with it, and we decide to fund it and go ahead, it's not just as simple as to say, okay, now we're just not going to have any trains on that section, that red section on the map, and we're just going to walk away from it, because something is going to have to be done with the current tracks and the crossings,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, and I guess clearly in that whole project, there would be agreements with the railroad. The railroad would be the one that would be building the new track through Hobson Yard, so they can kind of control their own destiny once we have the permits and the funding in place and agree to pay them. Part of that agreement and part of that work would be to get the new trackage in, the trains running there, and then an additional part of that is, okay, what do we do with the existing right-of-way? Does it get abandoned? We would work on, is there a need for trails? The existing rail and ties need to be removed. That would all need to be part of that same package, but the actual removal and the trains coming off of there don't happen until you actually have trains running over on the new line. So.
Larianne?
Perhaps you have this number from the study that you've done so far, but about how many residential homes, if you can quantify them, would be, stand to benefit from either the quiet zone or the potential removal of those, of that line?
that's a great question. I don't know if I have that number on the top of my head. That's a good question, though.
Would that be part of the study, though? Would we have some
Well,
indication?
certainly
of-
part of the study.
Yes.
We really have got, the other thing that we forget maybe in this thing too is right today, we have a triangle of property in South Salt Creek that's kind of trapped periodically, and it's a challenge to get emergency vehicles, and that's those folks that are south. Here, I'll put the map back down here. The people that are south of Rosa Parks, right in this little triangle right down here, you've got tracks through here, tracks over here, and tracks on the north. But you've got clearly this neighborhood that I would say everything from 9th and 10th Street west to Salt Creek, and then south of the railroad, all this whole area down there I think benefits. There's hundreds of homes in that, but yes, we would quantify that. So we talk about some cost benefit and some improvement of quality of life things, Larry.
Yeah. There was definitely some very passionate. I know many of you were at the public meeting, but there was a few citizens very, very passionate about, this is really close to their backyard. And they could almost name every time that whistle came through, so.
Okay.
Other questions?
So today you are looking for a motion that authorizes the quiet zone study to be put on hold, to move forward with Olson & Associates with a funding for a feasibility study,
Or an alternate study.
alternate study, thank you, and then also to begin negotiations with the railroad with regards to the Hobson Yard line.
Yes. And that's all contingent just on your approval of the budget. That is item number 9.
Okay. I will move approval of having an alternative quiet zone study for the Southwest Lincoln Quiet Zone as an option instead of, putting the quiet zone study on hold and doing the alternative study.
Okay.
I need a second.
Second.
Is it contingent on the budget being approved?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just to suspend the
asking-
existing study and enter into a contract that's contingent on the approval of the budget of 120,000 for the entire study.
100.
100.
And you're asking for a quiet zone study of this?
Not a quiet zone study, but an alternate. This is an alternative
Yeah,
to the
I
quiet
know.
zone study.
So I thought, it sounded like you were asking for a substitution of a quiet zone study rather than the alternate.
No, I'm asking for the alternative.
Okay.
And to suspend the existing study for the time being, the existing quiet zone study.
Okay, I think we're all on the same page.
And
Good luck
we
with that
haven't spent any
motion.
money yet on the
Well-
quiet zone study, have we?
Yes, we've spent about 80%. There's about 20,000 left in there. That got us to the point to where we were able to analyze the costs and the impacts, and we came up with this other idea. So there has been some money spent, but it's probably money well spent to get us to this point.
Any other questions?
Is there a second? You got a
A
second
second,
for it?
yeah.
Okay,
Ready to vote?
seeing none, call the roll.
Wilkins,
Yes.
Shorn,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Lamb.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries unanimously. Okay, item number 7, Rock Island Connection. Yes.
Sarah Hartzell from the Parks Department is here today to make a quick presentation. As we said, there's always new ideas and projects coming up. This is a trail project that involves the railroad, and Sarah's here to share her thoughts on that, and I got a couple handouts I'll do for her.
Good morning. Sarah Hartzell from the Parks Department. I'm here today to share a little information and ask for your consideration of a possible future project. This is a map of the trail system in the city of Lincoln. Doesn't reach out very far into the county here, but you can see some of the pieces that go off to the county to the south and to the west. The area that I wanted to talk to you about today is this general area. Most of you are familiar with the Jamaica North Trail. That's the trail that runs on the old railroad right-of-way. We own it to about half a mile south of Saltillo Road, and then the NRD owns it down to the county line. It gets picked up by another entity, and it's almost connected now so that you can run all the way to Kansas on that facility. So one of the longest trails in Nebraska. The Jamaica North is a great connection for people who live in the south part of Lincoln and who want to work downtown or visit the Haymarket or do anything downtown. It's a nice direct straight line, concrete for about half of the distance and crushed limestone for the other half. One of the issues that we have is that it's very hard to get from this part of Lincoln onto the Jamaica. You can see on here the green lines are trails that are existing. The red lines are trails that are planned. So if you look along the line of the Jamaica, which runs right on here, it's the nice straight line, not the squiggly one. The squiggly one is the Wilderness Park trails. But you can see a lot of red connections planned along that. But you have to go all the way up to Calvert Street, which is right about here, before you actually have a trail connection onto the Jamaica that could be accessed from the west. So what we end up with is a lot of people ride along Old Cheney Road here. There is a little sidewalk on there that gets close to the Jamaica. It's narrow, it's bumpy, but the hopes are to have a trail along there. However, when you get to the railroad, it's a surface crossing that doesn't really exist. You basically have to carry your bicycle or walk across the tracks outside of the pavement area because the pavement's rather narrow and doesn't have much of a shoulder to ride on. The other alternative is going south. Here you can go down South 14th. However, when you get to the city limits, that also is a county paved road without a shoulder. And so it's a little bit hairy riding down on that road to connect down to the Jamaica at this point. So what we end up with is a lot of folks that do a little renegade connection. So the Rock Island Trail is a really popular trail, probably one of our heaviest used in Lincoln. It comes down to Densmore Park. You can kind of see the ball fields there. And then it turns off at Densmore and heads out to 14th Street. However, the old railroad right-of-way that it's built on has a berm, a ridge that kind of keeps running straight. And so what a lot of people have done is continue on that. I'll show you the right-of-way here on the third sheet. Continue within that right-of-way along the kind of northwest side of the baseball fields there, to a point where an old bridge used to be that went over the active railroad lines. It's been removed. They ride down a slope. They ride or carry their bike across the railroad track, and then they cut across the railroad property and ride up another slope to get onto the Jamaica or onto the Wilderness Park property. I have heard anecdotal, and I won't name my source, reports that people have even been known to push their bikes underneath a stopped train, crawl over the train, pull their bike out from underneath the train and go across. So and as you can see, this is a 2013 aerial. When you've got a path that on an aerial appears to be about 6 feet wide and beaten down, this is all by bicycles and pedestrians. This isn't vehicles that ride along this. This is all done by bicycle and pedestrian traffic. We've tried signage, we've tried fencing. The railroad runs officers down there and tickets when they can. So it's a well-used path, a well-traveled path. Now the comp plan, if you go back to that first sheet, has shown, you can see a red dot right at that point there. The comp plan has shown a separated crossing at that point for probably about 20 years. I went back to the 94 plan and it was shown in there. So it's been on the map for quite some time. The desire is to get that across there. The the danger of the incursions, the accidents, the fatalities at those. Roger gave me some stats that he probably shared with you that in the last 2 years they've had over the nation 484 fatalities at actual crossings, but they've had 1,030 that are trespass fatalities. So the fatalities on trespass situations like this are much higher than on our regular crossings. So we were approached, the Parks Department was approached by the Great Plains Trails Network about 2 months ago, and Roger was kind enough to sit down with myself and with a couple representatives from that group to look at some opportunities for maybe creating this crossing, for getting this crossing done. Now, we've made a couple, the Parks Department over the past 12 years or so has made a couple attempts to get some grant funding to do this. It's an expensive project. Finding a grant that can carry that kind of a investment is relatively difficult. And then we've got the coordination with the railroads, and some grant programs are a little bit leery about even participating in grants that require cooperation with railroads because it can be so time consuming and they've got funding timelines that they need to work in. So Great Plains Trails Network approached us. We talked with Roger a little bit and decided this would be a good thing to bring to you folks. Great Plains has already committed $20,000 for a study to identify some options, prepare some budgets, some possible budgets, and come up with some materials that we can take forward for a fundraising campaign that GPTN would take on. Now, GPTN has been extremely successful in their past fundraising campaigns. The N Street Bikeway, they raised 10% of that cost. They raised a good portion of the cost for the Jane Snyder Trail Center. So they have been known to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for projects. And they believe that this one is one that will be very well supported. As you probably know, we're going through the long-range transportation plan update right now. Part of that was some outreach to the public on different projects that they felt were important. We did an outreach effort on trails projects. This one ranked in the top 3 with both our Pedestrian Bicycle Advisory Committee, which is a mayor's committee, and with the public at large. So this is ranking very high on the public scale, and that gave GPTN the feeling that they have a lot of fundraising potential here too. So the last sheet that I've got there has the first preliminary options that Olson's Associates has come up with. Number one would just follow that railroad right-of-way pathway that we've got right now. So to come off that embankment, this bridge would go over the railroad property, no piers inside of the railroad property. All of those would have to be outside on the parks property. have a landing point where the existing abandoned bridge is, and then a ramp that goes down, probably a bridge-like ramp rather than a earthen ramp, just because of the floodplain issues and stuff that we've got in there. And the height of the ramp would have to be about 24 feet or so. So sloping the sides out would take up quite a bit of room. So that's option one. Option two, maybe it would be a little easier to see on another sheet. Here we go. Option two, instead of continuing straight across here, would kind of swing down along the ball fields a little bit, stay at that same elevation, but cut across straight. That shortens the bridge up quite a bit instead of a diagonal bridge. And then basically the same thing, landing on the other side, ramp down to the north. And then option three shortens up that path even more, taking off from the same point but going straight across here, and then a ramp down. The option 1 and 2 set us up so that a future trail, which is planned to continue on that right-of-way across the park and out to the neighborhoods to the southwest, where we've got some growth identified out there. Option 1 and 2 set us up for that. We'd probably have to create a wall or something there to stop people from going out on that bridge until that was opened up and improved. But those set us up for this. Option 3 would mean we'd still have to create another ramp up to or some kind of a bridge over to the other alignment. So 1 and 2 are probably preferable at this point. Not asking for any action today, just asking, we just wanted you to be aware of the conversation that's going on, the problem that's out there, and we will continue working with Olson's, and they'll prepare their materials, and we'd like to come back to you at a later date with a little bit more well-formed plan of action.
Okay, questions for Sarah? All right, well,
Thank you.
exciting new project. And thank you for keeping us in the loop. We appreciate that.
Okay.
33rd, item 8.
I'd ask Doug Hawley to come forward and give a presentation on our 33rd and Cornhusker Pell study, and Chris Humphrey and I are here to answer questions as we go from there. So, Doug?
Sounds
thank
good.
you.
So this has been an exciting study. We started about a year ago now, and I first want to start by just thanking the board for allowing Schemmer and our partners to assist you with this study and ultimately develop a potential alternatives that came out of this study. Got a very brief presentation here. I know several of you have been engaged in this study throughout the life of it over the last year, so I'm not going to go into great detail today, but I've got a handful of slides I wanted to walk through here today. Just a reminder, the study looked not only at the crossings at 33rd and the railroad and 35th and Adams, but it also looked kind of in the general areas from 27th Street on the west, 48th Street on the east, Superior Street on the north, and Holdridge Street on the south. The objectives, there are about 5 objectives in the study. First and foremost is to reduce or eliminate the exposure between vehicles, pedestrians, and the trains at 33rd Street as well as at Adams Street. But there were other objectives. We want to reduce the delay of the crossing. There's about 3.6 hours a day that the rail is closed to traffic. Not only do we look now, we want to look at the future traffic. And then finally, there's been discussion on previous agenda items about pedestrians and trespassing. And that is a growing concern, a growing problem for the communities as well as the railroads. We cannot forget about the pedestrians and how they're going to be incorporated into a future project within this study area. A project of this size requires you to always consider no action. If the board does decide to move forward into a more design phase, we always have to compare those alternatives compared to the existing conditions, and what does that mean for the traveling public? What does that mean for the pedestrians in the area? So that's always a consideration as we do move this project into next phases. Many of you were at the public outreach, the 2 public meetings that were held during the study phase. One was in November, most recent was in March. Very well attended public meetings, predominant support for the project and the understanding of the need for something to be done in this area from the public. But in addition to the general public outreach, we also spoke and had multiple meetings with various local, state, and federal agencies. A project of this size will likely require funding not just from the RTSD, but also from varying partners from the state and federal level. I think we had about 13 meetings with kind of one-on-one meetings with agencies. Really, the agency coordination was identified to see if there's any really fatal flaws with the alternatives that have been developed. And I'm excited to say that there has not been any fatal flaws that have been identified. That doesn't mean it's an easy project by any means, but at this point, there have not been fatal flaws identified from the agencies that we've been coordinating with throughout this project. We did take 4 alternatives to the public in March. The slide presents the costs for those 4 alternatives. We not only looked at the current costs in 2016 dollars, we also projected those to future years to allow the board to identify and budget appropriately for a project should it move forward. So the summary, the recommendation that is coming out of the study includes 2 alternatives that are recommended to be carried over into future phases of the project. We call them Alternative C, which is a realignment of 33rd Street, a single viaduct over the railroad and tying back down to Cornhusker Highway, and then connecting back north to 33rd Street. And that it would also realign Adams Street, keeping it south of the existing railroad track, connecting to 33rd Street and joining and going over the tracks. The other alternative is Alternative C3, as we have called it. It's very similar to Alternative C, except for how Adams Street gets realigned and connected to Cornhusker Highway over the tracks. So really the Adams Street component is the difference between the 2 alternatives. We have been working with potential funding partners through this study. We have had multiple meetings with the Nebraska Department of Roads as well as the railroad to make them aware of the project, first of all, but also to help or allow them to start thinking about how this project's going to get funded. There's a couple graphs on this. The top graph identifies kind of the funding split of the funding components of the project. The bottom graph talks about a potential funding scenario between the RTSD, state and federal agencies as we've been working through those meetings with the Department of Roads officials. That funding discussion will obviously continue as we move forward into a preliminary design phase, but this is kind of the beginnings of that discussion. Last slide is talking about the schedule. So we've been working with on the study for about a year now. We've got we posted the draft report up on the website, the www.33cornhusker.com. There's a link on there to download the preliminary study. We are still working through some comments from agencies, and that will continue over the next probably month, I would think, to finalize it and get a final copy on the website. But the draft is up there for viewing for all of you as well as for the general public. Looking out from here, the next steps would be to move into a preliminary engineering phase. We do estimate that phase, which would include environmental analysis, would go between 2 and 4 years. It would extend through that process, as we would likely be following the federal process. And that's not a quick process, as some of you have probably dealt with in your other roles. We would then move into final design and the right-of-way acquisition phase, which that's going to push it into probably that 2022, 2023 timeframe. That would likely be the earliest that construction could start on a project of this magnitude. With that, definitely open up for discussion.
Roy has a question.
Sure. Just to be clear with the public, we have these alternatives C and C3.
Right.
By approving this feasibility study today, we're not saying we're going to adopt and build either one of these plans necessarily. That's correct?
That is correct. Really, the intent of the study was to determine if there are feasible alternatives to be constructed. And we do end up recommending 2. or some scenario or some combination of those two are feasible and can be or should be considered into the preliminary engineering. That does not mean there won't be tweaks or maybe some fairly significant changes to some of those alternatives.
Bill?
Will there be opportunities for more public input as you move through the process?
Yeah, very much. It may be quiet for a while as the RTSD and with help from Chris Humphrey and Roger works through some agreements with the railroad to get the project programmed. But once you would move into the preliminary engineering, there is a very significant public information, public involvement component that occurs during that preliminary engineering as well as the environmental analysis phase.
We did, I guess, offer the opportunity for public comment on our previous larger item. Is there anyone here that would like to make comment on this item? Just checking. Cindy?
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm excited about everything that's going on out in Northeast District, and this is, of course, a project that's being watched very closely by the citizens in Northeast Lincoln from conflict and from traffic standpoint. So I would like to move that we accept the findings from the 33rd and Cornhusker Planning and Environmental Linkages, the PEL study, that recommends there are feasible alternatives to be carried forward into the preliminary design and National Environment Policy Act NEPA evaluation phase. The PEL study report is a decision document that identifies 2 alternatives or modification thereof to minimize the conflicts between pedestrian vehicles and trains along the BNSF railway between North 27th Street and North 48th Street.
Second.
Okay. Thank you for that. We will note that some of the language in there was specified to make sure that we are adhering to federal and state requirements. So it's very specific. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll call the roll.
Shore,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Wilken.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Doug. Final item, 2016-2017 budget. And CIP.
Thought we were going to have trouble getting through the agenda today.
I know,
so
we're doing good.
I think the budget's going to be easy. For anybody that's listening, we do have a hard copy of the Pell study at our office at Engineering Services at 949 West Bond, and those are available for folks. So, let's see. Budget.
Do you hear? I have an extra. Is that what you need?
With extras.
Yeah.
I brought in minor revisions, but some changes to the actual budget CIP sheets over what you saw in March. So I will give you those. They're, I think, fairly simple and fairly easy. But, and I think there's some nuances in a couple of the projects that you have approved that I will try to cover as I go through the budget as well. Okay, so you actually have 3 sheets. The first one is just an update of our single-page fiscal year budget and expenditure. There are a couple of items in red in there. The O&M portion, the upper portion, the 79.7, is the same as what you saw in March. Because the Southwest 40th Street project is yet not finalized out, and we have not finished all of the final details with the railroad, we had budgeted $100,000 this fiscal year. None of that has been spent. I'm recommending we simply carry that over and rebudget that in case we need it in the upcoming year. So again, it's not an added expenditure, it's just moving that into the next line item. Down closer to the bottom, there is $100,000 shown for the Southwest Lincoln Feasibility Quiet Zone. That would be where we talked about studying running a new track through Hobson Yard. So there is $70,000 in there for that study, plus $20,000 for that's left over from the current quiet zone study for, let's say we decide that this option is feasible and we move ahead, we probably have some closeout and cleanup to document what we did in the quiet zone, and the decision was made not to move forward, and then I added $10,000 for just additional contingency. So I believe the budget you saw before was $70,000 on the old sheet. I increased that to 100. So the overall budget, bottom line dollar, is $130,000 more than what you saw in March. That's the only real change. The other thing I would like to say is that I have an asterisk on the $1 million for the 33rd and BNSF crossing. In your action today, you accepted the Pell study as an action and information that would allow us to move ahead. In approving this budget and having $1 million in that line item doesn't obligate this board to spend one penny of that until and if we are ready to move into that phase. And one of the things that I was going to ask you is, one of the things that I believe is crucial on a project like 33rd is that partners and funding agreements, at least in concept and in generalities, need to be laid out before we get too far down the road, paying for engineering and developing a public expectation that we're going to build a job or do a project. And what I would ask of you this morning is that you direct Chris Humphrey and myself to, as we all have many multiple number one priorities, but the priority for us this summer is to engage the railroad and develop a memorandum of understanding with them that lays out some cost sharing on that project before we would put out the next request for proposal to advertise for preliminary engineering. A formal letter from me was signed and given to the railroad last week in Savannah, laying out some ideas and concepts. I will get you copies of that, but the real crux of the letter was I asked them at their earliest convenience to name whom and where Chris Humphrey and myself can start meeting with the railroad to lay out those understandings and bring forward some of those ideas for cost sharing. So the public, I want the public to understand, we're not going to start spending that $1 million. There will be some of Chris and my staff time, but we would be coming back to you with a development of where we are on those cost sharing agreements, and then if we have those that you're comfortable, then we'd actually be issuing another RFP and going through a selection process for preliminary environmental work and preliminary engineering. And that contract would come to this board for approval. Several of you sat in on the process last time when we negotiated the scope and fee for this last one. So there's plenty of opportunities for the board to weigh in and say yes and moving ahead or not moving ahead.
Can we stop for a question?
Sure.
Bill?
I don't want to get too far away from that $1 million we were just talking about.
Okay.
How did you come up with that number?
Well, if you happen to look at your next page, you have 3 handouts. That next handout is a 12-year CIP. And working with Chris Humphrey and our consultants, if you'll notice for 33rd, we've got dollars laid out that go all the way across, and we believe that the $1 million, $1.2 million, $3.5 million, $7 million, those dollars are laid out to generally fit the schedule that was shown at the end of that Pell report. Now, we're going to have some delay as we put together but clearly, Bill, that is money that would suffice any work we would do in the upcoming budgeted year that
These
you
are
would
estimates,
approve.
right?
Yes, they are.
Are you pretty good at getting the estimates right?
We think so. That's why we hired experts to help us with that.
Chris is good at it, right?
Yes, she is. She is. So I'm wanting it made crystal clear that there is no, in approving this budget with that $1 million, there is no automatic authorization to start spending that $1 million on environmental and engineering until, and you may even want to make a motion at some point that the executive director and the project manager, are responsible to go get those types of agreements or understanding in place before we move ahead.
I think that would be great to have that on the record as we're still discussing 33rd and its impacts on the budget, to make that formal request of the executive director and the project manager to
Okay.
develop that MOU in conjunction with the railroad.
Okay, further discussion on the budget itself, the budget that's laid out, and the CIP that is developed here is based on delivery of those projects that have been showing up. I might point out towards the bottom, the South Beltway Railroad crossing, we have been accumulating but not spending and rebudgeting each year. And with this budget, we would be recommending that we are budgeting 3 years of that $13 million. That would be 6.5. Then we've got the remaining 3 years laid out. That's really the other bigger number in there. And with this CIP, then a third sheet that you have attached that is a cash flow. And the cash flow is laid out based on a recommendation and an idea that came from the county board to slowly ramp us from back up to 2.6 cents. We're currently in tax roll year 2015, we're at 1.6. This budget is based on next year's levy being at 1.9, followed by 2.3, and back to 2.6, 2.5 or 3 years out. And what you'll also notice is over on the far right-hand side, there aren't any red numbers, meaning that with the CIP laid out the way it is, and realize it doesn't have a quiet zone, it doesn't have a bridge for Jamaica Trail, and it doesn't have a new line going through Hobson Yard. We're not there yet. But for the projects that are laid out on the CIP, you can stay positive, and it shows that even when you get down into 21, 20, and 22, and 23, the revenue starts accumulating again. So there will be some resources in the future to do additional projects if that's what this board wants to do, like a Trails project or the Hobson Yard project. I'm not saying that this money would pay for all of that, but at least we are solvent under this cash flow scenario using a 2% annual valuation increase, which is pretty historical, and then a 3% annual operating increase. So that's the proposed budget. It's pretty much the same as what you saw in March. That's what I'm recommending to you to approve today in probably 2 motions. One would be a separate motion on the budget or any revisions, and then a second motion would be the actual for the levy request of 1.9 cents to go to the county board.
Roy?
Let's go back and talk about the South Beltway.
Okay.
We've talked previously about finding a way to take those funds as we accrue them and give them to the state, perhaps.
Yes.
Has there been any progress with the state on those kind of discussions?
Meetings are being set up with the state right now. We have a draft agreement that we're still kind of reviewing internally. Me kind of trying to represent, protect. Bill Kudelik has helped in some of the initial drafting. It's still pretty rough, and we're having conversations with the administration. And the next step, there is language in there that talks about the city and the RTSD having given money up front, that the NDOR would recognize the time value of that money and consider capping our total costs. And Director Esposito, I believe at this point, is working on setting up that meeting with the directors and assistant directors at NDOR to try to get that conversation moving to embody that language.
Right.
All right, any other questions with regards to the budget, which has 2 alterations, the CIP or the levy request? Okay, if not, I think we have
Time for a
3
motion.
different motions, and we can be adjourned. So if we can work through those. First
Are you counting adjournment in one of your three?
I think we need on the record the request for
For-
the MOU
Right.
with the project
Road.
manager and Roger and the railroad with regard to 33rd. So however you want to do it.
Let's start with, I move that we approve the fiscal year 17 budget request.
Second.
Okay. Any questions on that? To approve the fiscal year 16 budget request, call the roll.
Shore,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Wilken,
Is absent for this vote. Okay, now we're moving on to the levy request, which is on the third page of your final handout.
So we'd be moving to 2017?
We would be requesting.
16. It's-
16.
We'd be requesting the 1.9. That's the 2016 tax year roll, which is really FY in 17, 18.
I move we accept this proposal.
Would you,
Could I slightly word that? The motion would be that the board would request a 1.9 cent levy request from the county board for the FY 16, 17 budget.
that's what you
my
meant to say.
motion.
Okay.
That's what I meant to say.
So moved. Second.
Second by Roy. And call,
The recording secretary got
we
every
are
word, right?
voting now on the levy request of the point 19 for fiscal year 2016. Call the roll, please.
Christensen,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Wilken,
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Only need one more.
One more
You knocked it out of the park, Roger.
with the request for the MOU.
But we better restate the wording on that request.
Okay, perhaps I could offer
And then someone will say
something for
so
some-
moved,
So moved,
right?
perfect.
Yeah, good.
the board. The board would move that the executive director and the project manager for the 33rd and Cornhusker project make as the number one priority the development and securement of an MOU financial document with the railroad and other funding partners prior to moving ahead with additional NEPA and preliminary engineering.
Recording secretary is trying to keep up.
So moved. I'm glad you said that all. So moved.
Second.
Okay, call the roll.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Lamb, Wilken,
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. Final item, public comment. Is there anyone wishing to make public comment on any items on the agenda or any non-agenda items?
Seeing none, I move adjournment.
Second.
Okay, with a note that our next meeting is September 3rd, call the roll, please.
Avery,
Yes.
Lamb, Wilken,
Yes.
Shore.
Yes,
Christensen,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird.
we are adjourned. Thank you very much.